I never really thought property buying was in my future. And then I discovered the BRRRR approach, which is essentially a totally different, non-traditional way of buying property. So I'm going to explain everything I learned in a 12-month period because I've now bought 2 houses and made over $200,000 in equity. Hi, I'm Sophie Hallwright and I am one of the co-founders of The Curve. My approach to property was not traditional, and I honestly think that this is just the most genius idea that so many New Zealanders don't know about. So it's called the BRRRR approach: buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat. It's the idea that you buy well, you renovate and you add value, and then you rent it out, refinance that property, and you use that same equity to buy again. I've now done this twice. And I think it's just such a good example of how, as soon as you're on the property ladder, how easy it is to keep building your property portfolio. When you buy an investment property, differently to a home that you're going to live in, you need 30% deposit. This meant that there was a specific range of houses that I could look at buying and some that were just totally out of reach for me. I also knew I wanted to renovate, which meant actively adding value. And so I needed to really think about how much money a property I was looking at would cost to renovate before I'd be able to rent it out. Narrow down the types of properties that I could look at, the types of properties that I could bid for. And it just meant that I had a really clear target of how much I wanted to make by investing in this way. So for us, for our first home, we had $100,000 as our profit that we wanted to make. And when I say we, I did this with a friend, which meant that I couldn't spend any more than $400,000 on the first house. The full renovation from buying, signing and settling took us 6 weeks from the start to completion, which is definitely quick. That's actually a really good tip that I would keep in mind. You're going to have to pay for rents and interest and everything in the time that you're renovating because you're not renting it out. So I'm going to run through exactly how I did this and proper numbers. So we spent $400,000 on the house. We had budgeted 80,000 New Zealand for the reno. We ended up spending less than that, which was amazing. Quite rare. So we only spent 73,000. We renovated the kitchen, the bathroom, we replaced all of the carpets, we repainted. We kind of did everything. It was really run down, but we managed to do that all for 73,000 and we budgeted 80,000. And then when we got the property revalued, it came in that we'd made basically 126,000. So that was accounting for how much we bought it for, how much we spent, and then the value that was in between those numbers. The best things that you want to spend on are things like internal painting, new bathrooms, new kitchens, things that are going to make the actual experience for a tenant much better, therefore the rent that you can charge is a little bit higher. Things like having to replace the roof, not ideal, really expensive and not actually going to be adding much in terms of the rental value. When we were looking for our second one, that was actually something we had to consider. So the house that we bought, the roof is quite tired. It's going to need to be replaced probably in 5 years' time. So we had to factor that into the numbers. What makes a house really amazing if you're trying to do the BRRRR approach is you want to ideally add a bedroom. So if you think about the rental capacity, if you have a 3-bedroom house, so we bought a 3-bedroom house and we were able to add a bedroom, which meant that the people that would want to rent that would likely be young families, which means that the amount you can charge for rent, because there's more bedrooms, is higher. So really the key when it comes to this particular investing approach in property is ideally making the house more functional by adding another bedroom so that more people could live there. One tip I would say is when it comes to doing the numbers and figuring out how much you can buy a house for or renovate, you just want to be really conservative. You will hear anyone talk about a renovation and the idea that you should add minimum 20% to what you're budgeting. And if you've never done this before, definitely run it past builders or other people that are more experienced. When it comes to buying property, so many of us are guilty of getting emotional. This type of property investing, you have to think quite logically and unattached. So if you're buying a first home, of course, you want to live in it, you want it to feel a certain way. For me, I was buying property with the sole purpose, really, of trying to make money. A huge learning for me was buying well. And that didn't really land until I had the first opportunity to be in an auction. So the first house we bought was through an auction and I really, really wanted it. I got really excited and I was like, had my heart set on this all working out. And luckily it did, so it wasn't a tragic story, but I had to have a really strict conversation with myself to know that I'm not allowed to go above a certain amount. buying at the price that I could afford to be able to make the return that I was going for was really, really important. When it comes to finding the right area, something that you really need to consider is this area a place that could easily have a house rented out? As in, is there employment? Are there lots of people looking for houses? Obviously, you don't want to go and buy in the middle of nowhere where no one's trying to rent a house. So that's really important. When it came to me finding my second property, so the first one I bought was in Whangarei, the second one was in Te Awamutu, there was many reasons for choosing both of those locations. Te Awamutu is close enough to Hamilton, so it's a 20-minute drive. There's a lot of people that can't afford to live in Hamilton right now, so to find rental properties close enough for people's jobs, it just made sense. It's an up-and-coming area. You might not have considered that place originally or thought that maybe it was a good place to invest. For me, it really ticked a lot of boxes. When I was looking for property, so particularly the second one, I was a little bit nervous about the idea of going to Taranaki. And there is one big main centre where a lot of people who live there are employed, and that was shutting down at the time that I was looking. So if I was thinking about the viability of how many people might leave because they no longer have work, that was something that I really considered was, actually, this might be a kind of risky if I bought there. And that's not to say it's not a good place to buy, but it's just thinking about what is happening in this area that might make it a desirable place to live and therefore want to rent. So is there a motorway really close that's great for transport? Is there schooling close? If people have young kids and you've got a 4-bedroom house, are they in school zones? There's so many things that might sound practical and obvious, but they make an area that you're buying way more desirable for people when it comes to wanting to rent. So all of those things should come into consideration when you're deciding what type of area is going to be a good investment. I wanted to have both an active and a passive approach, and that's because I'm being quite aggressive in my property investing journey. I wanted to actively add value, so quickly add value to what I bought and make it more valuable. But I also wanted to have a passive approach, like what most people do when they buy a house and hold it for a long time. I wanted to hold it for a minimum of 5 years so that I could also see that equity or the value of that property growing over time just purely by following the market. So it was both an active and a passive approach. So I'm living in London. Our business is based over there, and I didn't really have an option. I needed to think creatively about how I was going to invest in New Zealand property. I genuinely still think that I would do it this way if I was based in New Zealand. And another thing that a lot of people don't know is if you have a home, like a primary residence, and you've had it for 3 years, you will have built up equity in that house. So you could use the equity in that and refinance in the same way that I did to get my second one, to go and get an investment property. And I just think that we often, as New Zealanders, think about property in quite there's one way to do it. Actually, there's so many different ways. And yeah, I think if I was based in New Zealand, I would still invest in this way. If you're interested in this type of investing, amazing. Start off by listening to our podcast where we explain this in way more detail. And if at that point you think, maybe this is a way that I could invest in property, then start speaking to people that can help make it happen. This is an active, time-intensive, money-intensive way of investing in property. So think of it like a business. I would never have done this, A, by myself, or B, without a significant amount of help from people who know what they're doing. A lot of people think that you can just buy property, pour some money in, and then sell it on for more. It's actually so much more complicated than that, and you have to be so careful when it comes to the numbers. So you'll hear people make jokes about renovations and you'll say, get 3 quotes from 3 builders and find the average of that. Or you might have heard people say, oh, if you get a quote for how much a renovation's going to cost, times it by 3. Renovations are so known for blowing out from a budget perspective, and the last thing you'd want to do is buy a property, start renovating, thinking that you only need 50,000 for the renovation, and it ends up being 200,000 for the renovation. You really want to sense check the numbers and how you're thinking about how much you have, how much you can spend on the reno, and then how much ideally you would like to make. Because if you just want to buy a property and hold it and let it grow in value over time, that's way less stressful than the type of investment that I've done. And so if you're choosing to do it like this, you want to make sure you're making money. Otherwise, I'm sure you could make a lot more money at your day job. If you decide to buy with a friend, like I did, or a partner, make sure that you have conversations about how long do we want to hold this for? What happens if you get a partner? Will you sign a prenup so that they don't have control over the property? You know, there's a lot of kind of hairy questions that you need to cover off to make sure that whoever you're doing this with, you're kind of going into business with them. So just keep in mind, if you are going to do it with a friend or a partner or a family member, that you have those kind of uncomfortable what if conversations, because you just want to make sure you're on the same page. I think it's just nice to be reminded that there's lots of different ways that you can invest in property, and perhaps something like the BRRRR approach could work for you.